Those were the first words she said to me. Not, I'm sorry for your loss. Not, you don't know me. Just 5 quiet words that split my world in half before I could even understand what they meant. I almost hung up. If she had called a month earlier, I probably would have. I would have assumed she was a scammer, someone looking for attention, or maybe a cruel person who enjoyed hurting strangers. But grief changes the way your mind works. It makes every impossible thing sound just believable enough to make your heart stop. I tightened my grip on the phone until my knuckles turned white. I'm sorry, I whispered. Who is this? There was silence on the other end. Not awkward silence, careful silence. The kind that belongs to someone choosing every word with terrifying precision. My name is Claire, she finally said, and I know how insane this sounds. I wish I were lying. I felt the room begin to spin, because my husband had only been dead for 6 days. 6 days since the state trooper knocked on my front door. 6 days since he told me there had been a collision outside Spokane during a business trip. 6 days since I signed paperwork I couldn't read because my tears blurred every line. 6 days since I buried the only man I had ever truly loved. Or at least, the man I thought I knew. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 38 years old, and until that phone call, I believed I had lived a remarkably ordinary life. I taught English literature at a public high school outside Seattle. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved watching teenagers slowly discover that stories weren't just words on paper. They were mirrors, warnings, and sometimes lifelines. My husband, Daniel, worked as a regional consultant for a logistics company. His job required constant travel. Portland one week, Boise the next, sometimes Denver, occasionally Phoenix. The trips had become so routine that I barely noticed when another suitcase appeared beside our bedroom door. People always joked that I was a business widow. I laughed with them. Now that phrase made my stomach turn. Daniel and I had been married for 14 years. We met in college. He wasn't the loudest man in the room or the most handsome. What drew me toward him was his patience. While everyone else rushed through life trying to impress each other, Daniel listened. Really listened. When my father died during my sophomore year, I disappeared from campus for nearly 3 weeks. Most people texted once. Daniel drove 2 hours every Saturday just to leave groceries on my mother's porch because neither of us wanted visitors. He never mentioned those drives afterward. He simply did them. That's the man I married. Or at least, that's the man I believed I married. We never had children. Not because we didn't want them. Life simply kept interrupting our plans. First it was money, then my mother's illness, then Daniel's promotion, then 2 miscarriages that neither of us ever truly recovered from. Eventually, we stopped saying next year. We quietly became the couple everyone assumed had chosen careers over family. Sometimes correcting people hurt more than staying silent. So we stayed silent. Instead, we built traditions. Sunday pancakes, Friday movie nights, road trips every October to the Olympic Peninsula, where Daniel insisted the rain smelled different than anywhere else in Washington. He always bought too much coffee. I always packed too many sweaters. Every marriage develops little rituals that seem meaningless to outsiders. To us, they were proof that home wasn't a place, it was another person. Or so I believed. After Daniel died, the house became unbearably quiet. Grief doesn't arrive all at once. It sneaks into ordinary moments. I'd pour 2 cups of coffee before remembering. I'd hear tires in the driveway and instinctively glance toward the front window. I'd wake at 2 a.m., reaching across the bed, only to touch cold sheets. People visited constantly during those first few days. Neighbors, co-workers, former classmates, church friends. Everyone brought casseroles, flowers, sympathy cards. The refrigerator became so full, I had to throw food away without ever tasting it. Everyone told me the same thing. Daniel was such a wonderful man. You were lucky to have him. He adored you. I believed every word, because I had lived those words. Or so I thought. By the 6th day, the visitors stopped coming. The silence settled into the walls. For the first time since the funeral, I was completely alone. That's when my phone rang. Unknown number. Normally, I ignored unknown calls. Something made me answer. I still don't know why. Maybe grief teaches us to expect bad news forever. Maybe some part of me already knew my life wasn't finished unraveling. Claire didn't cry while she spoke. That frightened me more than if she had been hysterical. People who lie often perform emotion. People carrying unbearable truths usually sound exhausted. I know you don't believe me, she said softly. I don't. You shouldn't. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. What do you want? I don't want money. I don't have much. I know. That answer froze me. How do you know that? Another pause. Because Daniel told me. I stood so quickly, my chair crashed onto the hardwood floor. Every muscle in my body locked. What did you just say? He spoke about you. The room suddenly felt too small. No. He did. No. He loved, don't you dare. The words came out louder than I intended. He was my husband. I know. No, you don't know anything. I know enough to understand why you hate me already. I don't hate you. That was the strangest part. Hatred requires certainty. All I felt was confusion. Pure, suffocating confusion. This is some kind of scam. I wish it were. My husband is dead. I buried him too. The sentence landed harder than anything she'd said before. Not because I believed it, because she believed it. I could hear it. Whatever game this was, she wasn't playing it for entertainment. She sounded broken. Exactly the way I sounded every morning when I woke up, hoping the last week had only been a nightmare. I have photographs, Claire said quietly. I don't care. I have our marriage certificate. Stop. I have 12 years of birthdays. Stop. Christmases. I said stop. And vacations. My breathing became uneven. I kept telling myself it was impossible. There had to be an explanation. Maybe she had dated him before me. Maybe she'd become obsessed. Maybe she'd edited photographs. Maybe Daniel had worked with her. Maybe the human brain fights impossible truths with desperate possibilities. I grabbed the kitchen counter to steady myself. When did you marry him? She answered immediately. May 14th. My blood turned cold. Daniel and I had married on May 9th, the same year, 5 days apart. No. I know. No. I didn't know about you. I laughed. It wasn't real laughter. It sounded sharp, almost painful. You expect me to believe my husband married 2 women in 1 week? I didn't expect you to believe anything. Then why call me? For the first time, Claire hesitated. When she finally answered, her voice was barely audible. Because after he died, she swallowed. Someone started following me. Every hair on my arm stood up. What? I think whoever knew his secret now thinks I know something too. I stopped breathing. For the first time since answering the phone, the question wasn't whether Daniel had betrayed me. The question had suddenly become something much darker. Who was following Claire? And what exactly had my husband been hiding? I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Claire's voice repeating the same sentence. I buried him too. Grief had already stolen my appetite, my concentration, and my sense of time. Now it was taking something even more dangerous, my ability to trust my own memories. I kept replaying 14 years of marriage like an old movie, searching for scenes I had somehow missed. Every business trip, every late night phone call, every anniversary, every smile. Had any of it been real? Or had I simply been too willing to believe the best in the man I loved? The sunrise arrived without bringing any answers, only another question. If Claire was telling the truth, who had I actually married? At 9 the next morning, my phone buzzed again. It was Claire. I stared at the screen for almost a full minute before answering. I almost didn't call, she admitted. I almost didn't answer. I understand. Neither of us spoke. It was strange. We should have hated each other. Instead, we sounded like 2 people standing on opposite sides of the same earthquake. I'll prove it, she finally said. How? I'll send photographs. Seconds later, my phone vibrated 3 times. 3 images appeared. The first showed Daniel standing beside Claire in front of a lake. His arm rested naturally around her shoulders. They looked relaxed, comfortable, like people who had spent years together. I zoomed in. There was no sign of editing, no awkward shadows, no artificial lighting. Even worse, he was wearing the navy watch I had bought him for our 10th anniversary. The second photograph showed them decorating a Christmas tree. The third made my knees buckle. It was a wedding picture. Daniel wore the same smile I remembered from our own wedding album. The same tie, the same silver cufflinks my father had given him. Only the woman beside him wasn't me. I dropped the phone onto the couch as though it had burnt my hands. For several minutes, I couldn't breathe. I know, Claire whispered through the speaker. I reacted the same way when I found your obituary online. My obituary? No, she paused. His obituary. My stomach tightened. You found it? I searched his name after the police contacted me. Police? I picked up the phone again. The police contacted you? Yes. Why didn't they tell me? They didn't know about you. The sentence hit harder than the photographs. To the authorities, Claire had been notified. I had been notified. Neither of us had been told another wife existed. Daniel had somehow managed to build two completely separate lives. Neither side knew the other existed. It sounded impossible, yet every passing minute made it harder to deny. I want to meet, Claire said. Every instinct screamed no. Meeting her meant making everything real. As long as she existed only as a voice, some part of me could still pretend this nightmare wasn't happening. But another part of me needed answers. When? Today. Where? She suggested a quiet coffee shop halfway between Seattle and Tacoma. Public, neutral, safe. I'll be there. The drive felt longer than it actually was. Rain covered the windshield, turning every traffic light into a blurry smear of color. Daniel had loved driving in the rain. He always claimed it forced people to slow down. For the first time, that memory didn't comfort me. It made me angry. How many roads had he driven after leaving my house, only to arrive at hers? Claire was already waiting when I arrived. I recognized her immediately. Not because of the photographs, because she looked exactly the way grief feels. 36, maybe 37. Dark hair tied back carelessly. No makeup. Dark circles beneath exhausted eyes. She stood when she saw me. Neither of us moved closer. Neither of us smiled. Neither of us knew the rules for meeting the other widow of the same man. You look... She stopped herself. So do you. We both laughed awkwardly. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Over coffee that neither of us touched, we slowly began comparing our lives. Every answer raised another impossible question. Daniel had told Claire he worked in commercial transportation. That part was true. He had simply described a different division of the company. To me, his parents had supposedly died years earlier. To Claire, they were alive until 5 years ago. To me, he hated seafood. To Claire, he ordered salmon almost every Friday. Little things, hundreds of little things. Not enough to make someone suspicious individually. Enough to create two completely different husbands. He snored? I asked. Claire blinked. No. I stared. He snored every night. She frowned. No. Dennisy hesitated. Unless... Neither of us finished the sentence. People don't snore on command. Unless they feel comfortable enough to sleep deeply. Had he been pretending around one of us? The thought was absurd. Yet nothing about this situation obeyed ordinary logic anymore. Claire removed a small envelope from her purse. I brought something. Inside were dozens of receipts. Hotels, gas stations, restaurants. Every receipt matched one of Daniel's supposed business trips. Trips he had described to me in detail. Trips during which he had apparently been living another life. I noticed something else. Every receipt came from cities only 2 or 3 hours apart, never across the country, never overseas, always close enough to drive, meaning he had never traveled nearly as much as I believed. The realization made me sick. For 14 years, distance had been an illusion. Then I noticed something strange. One receipt listed a small hardware store, another listed children's clothing, another a veterinary clinic. I looked up. You have children? Claire shook her head. No. A dog? No. She leaned forward. I wondered about those too. Neither of us spoke. If those purchases weren't for her, who were they for? Was there another woman? No, that was impossible. Wasn't it? The idea seemed ridiculous. Until I remembered thinking 2 wives were impossible only 24 hours earlier. I need to ask you something, Claire said carefully. What? Did Daniel ever disappear without explaining why? I almost answered no. Then a memory surfaced. 3 years earlier, our anniversary dinner. Daniel had received a phone call. He apologized, said there had been an emergency shipment delayed outside Everett. He disappeared for nearly 4 hours. When he returned, his shirt was wrinkled and his hands were shaking. He claimed everything had been resolved. I never questioned it, not once, because trust doesn't ask for evidence. It fills in missing pieces by itself. Claire nodded slowly. He did the same thing with me. When? Our anniversary. The words hung between us. The same date, the same evening. Had he left one anniversary dinner to attend another? My phone suddenly vibrated. Unknown number. Claire looked at the screen. So did mine. Her phone was ringing too. Unknown caller. At the exact same moment. We exchanged uneasy glances. Neither of us answered. The call stopped simultaneously. A second later, both our phones received the same text message. No number, no signature, just 6 words. Stop looking or you'll regret it. Neither of us spoke. Someone knew we were together. Someone knew we were asking questions. Someone wanted those questions to stop. Claire's face turned pale. I told you. Told me what? I wasn't imagining someone following me. I looked toward the cafe window. Across the street sat a dark grey SUV. Its engine was running. The driver's face was hidden behind the rain-covered windshield. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe grief had made us paranoid. Or maybe someone had been watching us from the moment we arrived. For the first time since Daniel's funeral, I realized something terrifying. This story wasn't about discovering a husband's betrayal anymore. Someone else had entered the game. And whoever they were still alive. The grey SUV was gone by the time Claire and I rushed outside. The parking space across the street was empty. No tire marks, no driver. Nothing except the rain washing away every trace that someone had been there at all. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. We simply stood beneath the awning, staring at the empty street, as if the vehicle might suddenly reappear. Finally, Claire looked at me. We're being watched. For the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't argue. Because whether the SUV had been real or not, the text message certainly was. Someone knew where we were. Someone wanted us to stop asking questions. The only question was why. That evening, I drove back to my house with one thought repeating over and over in my head. Daniel had hidden an entire marriage. If he could hide that, what else had he hidden? I walked through the front door and looked around the house differently. For 14 years, every room had been filled with memories. Now it felt like a crime scene. I started opening drawers, closets, boxes in the attic. Nothing. Daniel had always been obsessively organized. Too organized. Every document sat exactly where it belonged. Every receipt had been filed. Every password written in a small notebook. Everything. Except anything that explained Claire. Hours passed before I finally noticed something strange. His old leather travel bag. The one he claimed was broken years ago. It still sat on the top shelf of the garage. I pulled it down. Inside were only a few shirts and an old shaving kit. I almost zipped it closed again. Then I noticed the bottom felt unusually thick. There was a hidden compartment. My heart began pounding. Inside lay a single envelope. On the front, in Daniel's handwriting, were 5 words. If you found this, read together. Together. Not Emily, not my wife. Together. He had known. He had known that one day Claire and I would meet. An hour later, Claire was sitting across from me in my living room. The envelope rested unopened between us. Neither of us wanted to be the first to touch it. Finally, I slid it toward her. You open it. She slowly unfolded several handwritten pages. The first sentence stole the air from the room. If you're reading this, I'm already dead, and both of you deserve the truth I was too cowardly to tell while I was alive. Neither of us interrupted. Claire continued reading. Daniel admitted everything. He had married both of us, not because he enjoyed lying, not because he wanted 2 families, because he had been trapped by one terrible decision that had snowballed into years of deception. 20 years earlier, before meeting either of us, Daniel had witnessed financial crimes committed by one of his business partners. When he threatened to report them, the partner retaliated. Daniel's identity was stolen. His financial records were manipulated. His life became entangled in a years-long legal nightmare. A retired attorney helped him rebuild under a different legal identity, while investigators quietly worked to expose the criminal network responsible. When those investigations stalled, Daniel found himself living between 2 identities that were supposed to exist only temporarily. Then he met me. Months later, under paperwork that had never been fully corrected, he met Claire. By the time he realized the legal mess had become irreversible, he had already fallen in love. Twice. Instead of breaking 2 hearts, he chose to tell himself he could somehow protect both lives. Year after year, lie after lie. Cowardice disguised as sacrifice. He never stopped intending to confess. He simply kept waiting for the right time. That time never came. Claire lowered the pages. I don't know whether to cry or scream. I already did both. The explanation answered many questions, but not all of them. The threatening text, the SUV, the police, none of it fit. Then another envelope slipped from between the pages. This one contained a flash drive. A single sticky note was attached. Give this to Detective Harris. Trust no one else. Claire looked at me. We have to. I nodded. For the first time since Daniel's death, we finally had something concrete. Detective Marcus Harris listened without interrupting. He read Daniel's letter twice. Then he inserted the flash drive into a secure computer. Dozens of files appeared. Bank records, contracts, photographs, emails, audio recordings, years of evidence. Not against Daniel, against executives inside the logistics company where he worked. Money laundering, insurance fraud, bribery, witness intimidation. The same network Daniel had stumbled upon decades earlier had never disappeared. It had simply grown larger. The detective slowly removed his glasses. I've been chasing these people for 6 years. You knew? We knew pieces. He looked directly at us. Your husband had the missing ones. Within days, federal investigators began making arrests. News stations reported one executive after another being taken into custody. Millions of dollars in illegal transactions surfaced. Former employees began cooperating. Everything collapsed astonishingly fast. The threatening text suddenly made perfect sense. Someone had realized Daniel was dead. They feared he had left evidence. When Claire searched for his obituary, someone monitoring those investigations noticed unusual activity. Then they saw us meeting. They assumed we had found the files. In reality, they had been watching two grieving women who understood almost nothing. Until now. Several weeks later, Detective Harris called again. There was one more thing. He handed me a small sealed box recovered from Daniel's office. Inside rested 2 identical jewelry boxes. One contained a wedding ring, the other, another wedding ring, both engraved. One read, Forever Emily. The second read, Forever Claire. Neither ring had ever been given. Beneath them sat one final note. I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope one day you'll believe that loving both of you was the only part of my life that wasn't a lie. Claire quietly closed the box. I wanted to hate him. So did I. But I can't anymore. Neither could I. Not completely. Love and betrayal had become so tightly woven together that separating them felt impossible. Daniel had lied every single day of our marriages. That could never be erased. But neither could the countless moments of genuine kindness. The nights he stayed awake beside hospital beds. The birthdays he never forgot. The dreams he encouraged. The lives he genuinely tried to make better. People often want villains to be entirely evil, heroes entirely good. Real life is rarely that generous. Sometimes the deepest wounds are inflicted by people who truly loved us. And somehow, that hurts even more. 6 months later, Claire and I met again. Not because we had to, because we wanted to. The anger between us had disappeared. It had never truly belonged there. Neither of us had betrayed the other. We had both been victims of the same impossible secret. We visited Daniel's grave together. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, Claire smiled sadly. You know, What? I think he'd be shocked we're friends. I laughed. A real laugh this time. He'd probably think we were planning to yell at him. We still are. We placed fresh flowers beside the headstone. Then we turned and walked away. Not because the pain was gone, but because we had finally learned to carry it without letting it define us. Daniel's greatest mistake wasn't loving two women. It was believing that the truth could wait forever. It never can. Eventually, every secret finds daylight. And when it does, it changes everyone it touches. Some people are destroyed by that truth. Others rebuild themselves with it. Claire and I chose to rebuild. Not for Daniel, for ourselves. Because the future should never remain buried beside the people we've lost. Some betrayals begin with cruelty. Others begin with fear. Neither excuses the damage they leave behind. The truth may arrive years too late, but it still has the power to free the people left behind. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't mean saying that what happened was acceptable. It simply means refusing to let someone else's choices control the rest of your life. If this story made you think, or if you found yourself wondering what you would have done in Emily's place, share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have forgiven Daniel? Or would his secret have been impossible to overlook? I'd love to read your perspective.